The Hogwarts staff room had never been so tense yet so absurd. Professors sat around the long table, looking at one another in disbelief. It had been a strange day. Two of Hogwarts' brightest students, Harry Potter and Hermione Granger, had regressed into toddlers after a sudden and unexplained magical outburst. Now the entire staff had to figure out how to care for the miniature versions of two students who had just spent the entire day throwing tantrums, stealing feathers, and wreaking havoc in Flitwick's class. Professor McGonagall sat at the head of the table, looking exhausted but trying to maintain her usual composure. Professor Snape, arms crossed and scowling, leaned against the back wall. Professor Trelawney hovered near the window, muttering ominously about dark forces. Dumbledore, of course, looked the calmest of them all, his fingers steepled as he listened patiently to the chaos. "So we have two of our first years behaving like toddlers," McGonagall began, her voice tight, "and we must decide how to handle this situation." "Well, first off," Snape drawled, his tone laced with sarcasm, "perhaps we should find them a nice playpen. Clearly they can't be trusted to walk freely about the castle without knocking over ink pots or throwing feathers at staff." McGonagall shot him a sharp look. "This is not a joking matter, Severus. We need practical suggestions." "Indeed," said Sprout earnestly. "What if we gave them something to focus on? Toddlers do need structure. We could put them in a class of their own." "And what, Pomona, would that class be?" Snape replied with a sneer. "How to Stop Crying 101. Perhaps advanced finger painting." Sprout glared at him, but before she could reply, Trelawney swept in, her shawls fluttering. "I have seen the future," she declared, her voice trembling dramatically, "and I fear these children's regression is a sign of—" "Oh, for Merlin's sake, Sybil," McGonagall snapped. "Not everything is an omen." Trelawney gasped and backed away, muttering something about impending doom. Professor Flitwick, who still looked frazzled from his experience with Harry and Hermione earlier that day, spoke up next. "Well, perhaps we could enchant their surroundings to keep them safe? Toddler-proof the classrooms, as it were. If they get upset again, at least they won't be able to throw books or attack me with feathers." Snape smirked. "Yes, Phileas, because toddler-proofing a castle filled with ancient magic and dangerous creatures is such a simple task." "Severus, that's quite enough," Dumbledore said gently but firmly. "Let's not dismiss any ideas out of hand." At that moment, Hagrid cleared his throat from the back of the room, his voice booming. "Well, what if we take 'em outside? You know, let 'em run around a bit. Maybe give 'em a couple of small animals to play with. Toddlers like animals, right?" "Animals?" Snape raised an eyebrow. "Hagrid, they're not pets. They need supervision, not a zoo." "Well, I reckon they'd be happier," Hagrid said defensively. McGonagall shook her head. "That's not going to work. We need to keep them somewhere safe where we can ensure they don't get into more trouble. The last thing we need is Harry Potter getting into the Forbidden Forest in a tantrum." Snape rolled his eyes. "Lock them in a room, perhaps the dungeons. At least they wouldn't be able to cause any trouble there." "No," McGonagall interjected. "We're not locking them away. They need care and attention, not to be treated like prisoners." At this point, the entire room was talking over each other. Professor Sinistra suggested reading them stories about the stars to calm them down. Madame Pomfrey proposed feeding them calming potions to stop the tantrums. Sprout brought up the idea of a nature walk through the gardens with the hopes that fresh air would wear them out. It was getting more and more ridiculous. Suddenly, Professor Slughorn, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, enjoying some crystallized pineapple, spoke up with a chuckle. "Oh, honestly, why don't we just plonk a house elf with them? They're already used to looking after children after all. Give them to one of the elves and they'll be happy as clams." There was a pause, and then a few professors started to chuckle, thinking he was joking. But Dumbledore's eyes twinkled and he stroked his beard thoughtfully. "You know, Horace, that may not be such a bad idea." Everyone fell silent. Even Snape looked surprised. "You can't be serious, Headmaster," he said slowly. "Oh, I am quite serious," Dumbledore replied, smiling serenely. "House elves are very capable when it comes to keeping things tidy and under control, and Toddlers, while a bit more active, aren't much different from some of the messes they deal with regularly in the kitchens. McGonagall blinked. Albus, are you suggesting we hand over Harry Potter and Hermione Granger to a house elfum? Well, Minerva, Dumbledore mused, considering that none of our other suggestions are particularly practical, it may be our best option. The house elves can ensure they're safe, well-fed and properly supervised, and it would give the rest of us time to focus on discovering the cause of their condition. Snape raised an eyebrow. So we're just going to let a house elf play nanny to Potter and Granger, just like that? Well, Dumbledore said, still smiling, it's not as if we've come up with a better solution, Severus, and I believe the elves will handle the task with great care. The room was quiet for a moment as everyone considered the idea. Slowly, McGonagall nodded. As bizarre as it sounds, it might actually work. I suppose it's better than keeping them in a locked room, Flitwick added with a chuckle. I think it's brilliant, Sprout said brightly. The elves will keep them safe and entertained. They're used to dealing with all kinds of chaos. I'll, let the kitchen elves know, Hagrid mumbled, still a bit confused but willing to go along with the plan. Dumbledore stood, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Then it's settled. We'll have a house elf care for Harry and Hermione until we've sorted out how to return them to their proper ages. Thank you, Horace, for the delightful suggestion. Slughorn smiled broadly, clearly pleased that his offhand remark had become the solution. Snape shook his head, muttering, "We're all mad, absolutely mad." But Dumbledore only chuckled, standing up and ushering the staff out of the room. Well then, let's go inform the house elves. I imagine Harry and Hermione are in good hands already. Later that evening. The kitchens. Inside the Hogwarts kitchens, Harry and Hermione, still in their toddler states, were sitting on a cushioned chair, happily munching on biscuits as a house elf named Dobby floated a soft toy in front of them, keeping them entertained. "Feather toy fly, yay!" Harry cheered, clapping his hands. Hermione squealed with joy, reaching out to grab the toy. "Me like this." Dobby smiled widely. "Dobby is very happy to help the little wizards," he said, bouncing the toy gently in the air. And so the two miniature troublemakers were kept safe under the watchful care of a house elf, while the staff breathed a collective sigh of relief, not bothering to let Dobby what kind of night he was in for. The Hogwarts kitchens, typically a place of quiet productivity as house elves worked their magic to prepare the next day's meals, had been transformed into a playground of chaos, courtesy of toddler Harry and Hermione. They were supposed to be winding down for bed, but it was clear neither of them had any intention of doing so. Dobby, tasked with the impossible job of getting them to sleep, was beginning to look frazzled. "Harry Potter, Miss Hermione, it is time for sleep. You must rest now. Young wizards need their sleep." But Harry, now standing on top of a kitchen stool, was giggling uncontrollably as he dipped a large ladle into a bowl of pudding and flung it across the room. "Me make flying pudding," he shouted gleefully as the pudding splattered onto the walls and floor. Hermione, sitting cross-legged on the counter, was using a giant fork like a hairbrush, awkwardly pulling it through her tangled locks. "Look, Dobby, me make hair pretty," she said proudly, her eyes wide with mischief. Dobby gasped in horror. No, Miss Hermione, forks are not for hair. Dobby must brush your hair properly. Please, put the fork down." But Hermione wasn't listening. She had already moved on to the next toddler activity, banging a spoon against a pot like a drum, the clanging echoing through the kitchen. "Bang, bang, bang," she sang, completely ignoring Dobby's plea. "Me make music." Harry, meanwhile, had climbed down from his stool and was now rummaging through a cupboard, pulling out random kitchen utensils and waving them in the air. "Me help cook," he declared, grabbing a spatula and pretending it was a wand. "Spatula magic!" He waved it around dramatically. "Wingardium spatula!" he yelled, flicking it towards a pile of flour bags. As if on cue, the bags of flour toppled over, sending a cloud of white powder into the air. Both Harry and Hermione erupted into fits of giggles, clapping their hands as the flour settled on their heads, making them look like tiny ghosts. "No, Harry Potter, Miss Hermione, please stop. Dobby begs you," Dobby cried, wringing his hands as he hurried over to clean up the mess. He grabbed a towel and tried to wipe the flour off Harry's face, but Harry only laughed and dodged away, running around the kitchen in circles. "Me want to help, me want to help," Harry repeated, grabbing a rolling pin and banging it on the counter. "Me roll the dough." Hermione, watching her partner in crime, immediately joined in. Me too," she cried, grabbing a whisk and furiously twirling it in the air. She stuck the whisk into a bowl of eggs and milk, splashing the mixture everywhere as she tried to whisk it like a professional. Dobby, clearly overwhelmed, ran after them, trying to keep up. No, wizards should not be in the kitchen. It is very dangerous. Please, let Dobby do the cooking." But Harry was already pouring flour onto the counter, making an enormous mound of it as he patted it with his hands. "Me make a mountain," he shouted, eyes wide with excitement. "Hermione, look! Me make big mountain." Hermione, not to be outdone, grabbed a handful of sugar and dumped it on top of Harry's flour pile. "Snow on mountain!" she declared triumphantly as sugar spilled everywhere, mixing with the flour in a sticky, powdery mess. Dobby was now frantically trying to clean up the chaos, using his magic to send cleaning supplies zooming across the kitchen. A mop and bucket whizzed past Harry, who laughed and tried to grab it. "Flying mop! Me want to ride it like broom!" No, not the mop!" Dobby cried, grabbing it out of Harry's hands just in time. "Dobby is begging you both to settle down. It is time for bed, not time for making mess." But Harry and Hermione had no interest in sleep. They had discovered the pantry and were now pulling jars of ingredients off the shelves, inspecting them like curious toddlers. Harry picked up a jar of pickles and shook it, the liquid sloshing inside. "What's this?" he asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Hermione grabbed a jar of jam and stuck her fingers inside, scooping out a big glob and smearing it on her face. "Look, me make face paint," she giggled, smearing more jam on her cheeks like war paint. Dobby was beside himself. "Miss Hermione, that is not for face, that is for toast. Dobby needs to clean—" "Oh, Merlin, no!" Harry had opened a bag of rice and was now pouring it onto the floor like it was confetti. "Snowstorm!" he shouted, dancing around in the rice as it scattered everywhere. "Me make snowstorm in the kitchen." Hermione clapped her hands in delight. "Snowstorm? Me want more." She grabbed another bag, this time lentils, and dumped it onto the floor, mixing it with the rice. More snow. Dobby, who had never been more overwhelmed in his life, desperately tried to regain control. "No more snowstorm, please. Dobby will get in trouble. Please, Harry Potter, Miss Hermione, go to bed. Dobby will give you nice warm milk and cookies." But the toddlers were unstoppable. Harry had now climbed onto the counter, using a colander as a hat, while Hermione was trying to juggle eggs, which of course were cracking open and spilling onto the floor. "Me make pancakes!" Hermione shouted gleefully, tossing the eggs into a bowl and splashing more flour on top of them. "Me too, pancakes!" Harry joined in, grabbing a bottle of syrup and pouring it all over the counter, the sticky liquid pooling around his feet. Dobby was nearly in tears. "No more pancakes, no more mess. Please, go to sleep." He conjured a fluffy blanket and tried to drape it over them, hoping it would calm them down. But Harry wriggled free and ran to the stove. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to the oven. "Me make fire?" Dobby gasped in horror. "No, no fire. Harry Potter must not touch the stove. It is dangerous." Hermione, oblivious to the panic, grabbed a spatula and waved it at the stove like she was casting a spell. "Me cook fire, fire pancakes." "No fire, no fire!" Dobby cried, running over and pulling them both away from the stove. "It is bedtime for little wizards. Please, Dobby will do anything. Just go to sleep." Finally, Dobby had an idea. He snapped his fingers, and in an instant 2 small fluffy beds appeared in the middle of the kitchen, complete with soft pillows and cosy blankets. "Look! Bedtime! Dobby has made you special beds just for Harry Potter and Miss Hermione." Harry and Hermione, surprisingly, seemed intrigued by the beds. They toddled over, still giggling, but they climbed into the beds and snuggled into the blankets. "Me want story," Harry said, yawning as he hugged his pillow. "Me too, story," Hermione agreed, her eyelids drooping. Dobby, nearly collapsing with relief, nodded quickly. Yes, Dobby will tell you a story, a very good story." He sat down beside their beds and began telling a quiet, gentle story about brave house elves and peaceful kitchens. Finally, as the story continued, Harry and Hermione's eyes began to close. Within minutes, they were both fast asleep, surrounded by flour, sugar, and the remnants of their pancake experiment. Dobby exhaled deeply, wiping his brow. "Dobby will clean up the mess now," he whispered to himself. "And maybe, just maybe, get some sleep too."